Under the gray sky of a bustling city, young Daniel wandered the streets, clutching a small paper bag in his hands. The aroma of freshly baked bread seeped through, mixing with the crisp morning air. He had spent his last few coins to buy a simple loaf, his only meal for the day. Daniel's stomach growled, but he ignored it. Hunger was not new to him. He had learned to endure it, just like he had learned to endure the cold nights sleeping on the hard pavement. Life had not been kind, but he had made peace with it. As he sat on the steps of an old bookstore, he noticed an elderly man sitting across the street, shivering in the cold. His clothes were thin and tattered, barely offering protection against the biting wind. The man's frail hands trembled as he hugged his thin coat around himself, his sunken eyes scanning the streets as if searching for a miracle. Pedestrians walked past him, their faces buried in scarves, too busy to notice or simply choosing to ignore him. Something in Daniel's heart ached at the sight. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to hope that anyone would show kindness. Without hesitation, he crossed the street and extended his only meal. "Sir, you look hungry. Please take this," he said softly. The man's eyes widened in surprise. "You're giving me your food, child?" Daniel nodded. "I can find something else later." The elderly man hesitated. He studied Daniel's face. The boy's clothes were just as worn, his fingers red from the cold. "But, you need this too." Daniel simply smiled. "I'll be okay." Tears welled up in the man's eyes as he accepted the bread with trembling hands. He took a small bite, chewing slowly, savoring the simple gift as if it were a feast. "You are very kind," he whispered. "I won't forget this." Daniel didn't expect anything in return. He wasn't looking for praise or gratitude, he just couldn't walk away knowing someone else was hungrier than he was. He turned to leave, his empty stomach protesting, but his heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. Little did he know, this small act of kindness would change his life forever. Little did Daniel know, this simple gesture would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. As he walked away, a well-dressed man who had been watching the scene from a distance stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement. "Excuse me, young man," the stranger called out. Daniel turned, surprised. The man had a warm yet curious expression, his tailored coat and confident posture setting him apart from the hurried crowd. "That was a very generous thing you did," the man said, nodding toward the elderly man who was still hungrily nibbling at the bread. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "It was nothing, sir. Just a piece of bread." The man smiled. Sometimes, the smallest kindness has the biggest impact. Daniel glanced down at his empty hands, feeling the weight of his own hunger creeping back in. He hadn't thought much about what he had done, it had simply felt right. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card, offering it to Daniel. "Come to this address tomorrow," he said. "I think I might have something for you." Daniel hesitated before taking the card, the smooth texture foreign against his rough fingertips. The name printed on it was unfamiliar, but the bakery's address was just a few streets away. "Why?" Daniel asked cautiously. The man chuckled. "Let's just say I believe in rewarding kindness. Be there at 9 in the morning." With that, the stranger gave him one last knowing smile before walking away, disappearing into the busy street. Daniel looked down at the card again. Could this be real? Could something good actually be coming his way? For the first time in a long time, hope flickered in his heart. Curious and cautious, Daniel arrived at the address the next day. To his amazement, it was a large bakery, the finest in town. The scent of warm bread and sweet pastries filled the air, wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. Through the large windows, he could see bakers kneading dough, customers chatting, and workers bustling about with trays full of fresh goods. It was a world he had never been a part of, and yet, standing there, he felt an unfamiliar but welcome sensation, hope. The same well-dressed man greeted him at the door, his smile warm and inviting. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Come inside." Daniel hesitated for a moment before stepping in, the wooden floors creaking softly under his worn-out shoes. He had never been inside a place so bright, so full of life. The bakery smelled like warmth, like home, something he hadn't felt in a long time. I own this bakery, the man continued. And I saw something special in you yesterday. You have a good heart, Daniel, and that's something far more valuable than money or success. Daniel looked up, confused. But why would you help me? The man chuckled. Because someone once helped me when I had nothing. He paused before adding, would you like to work here? We could use someone with a kind heart like yours. Daniel's eyes widened. He had never been offered an opportunity like this before. He had spent his life scraping by, doing whatever it took to survive, but a real job? The idea seemed almost too good to be true. Really? He asked hesitantly. I've never had a job before. The man's smile grew. Then let's make this your first. What do you say? Daniel glanced around the bakery, his heart pounding. He thought of the cold streets, the hunger, the uncertainty that had followed him for so long. Then he thought of the kindness that had brought him here, of the simple act of giving away his last meal. Tears welled up in his eyes as he nodded eagerly. Yes. I'd love to. For the first time in a long time, hope flickered in his heart, not as a distant dream, but as something real, something within reach. Over the months, Daniel worked tirelessly at the bakery. He arrived early, cleaned diligently, and absorbed every lesson he could about baking. Each day brought new challenges, but he faced them with determination. He learned how to knead dough to perfection, measure ingredients with precision, and create pastries that made customers smile. Though his hands were often covered in flour and his muscles ached from carrying heavy sacks of flour and sugar, he never complained. Mr. Thompson observed him closely. He saw the hunger in Daniel's eyes, not just for food, but for knowledge, for a chance at a better future. The young boy was quick to learn, his hands steady, his instincts sharp. He reminded Mr. Thompson of someone from long ago. One evening, after closing, Mr. Thompson wiped his hands on his apron and gestured for Daniel to sit at one of the wooden tables. The bakery was quiet now, the scent of fresh bread still lingering in the air. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. You remind me of someone I once knew, Mr. Thompson said, his voice thoughtful. A boy who had nothing but worked hard to change his fate. Daniel sat forward, intrigued. Who was he? Mr. Thompson exhaled, his eyes distant, lost in a memory. He was just like you, hungry, cold, uncertain of his place in the world. But he had something more valuable than riches, perseverance and kindness. Daniel listened intently, sensing that the story he was about to hear would change everything. Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, his eyes reflecting memories long buried beneath years of success and hard work. Many years ago, I was homeless. Cold, starving, and hopeless. I had no family, no friends, just the clothes on my back and the ache of hunger that never seemed to fade. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He had never imagined Mr. Thompson, the respected owner of the bakery, had once known the depths of despair that Daniel himself had experienced. One day, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice softer now, a kind boy gave me a piece of bread when I had nothing. Just like you did for that old man. He paused, as if reliving the moment. It wasn't just the bread that saved me, it was the kindness, the simple act of being seen when I felt invisible. Daniel's fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden table. What happened next? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The memory of that kindness stayed with me, Mr. Thompson said, smiling wistfully. It gave me the strength to keep going. That small piece of bread reminded me that there was still goodness in the world, that I wasn't alone. He looked Daniel in the eyes. I worked hard. I took any job I could find, washing dishes, sweeping floors, until I finally saved enough to rent a small room. Over time, I found my way into a bakery, much like this one, and learned the craft. I fell in love with it. The smell of fresh bread, the warmth of the ovens, it gave me purpose. Daniel swallowed hard. The weight of Mr. Thompson's words pressed against his chest. He had always thought of kindness as something small, something fleeting. But here was proof that even the smallest acts could change a person's entire life. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his smile warm and knowing. You see, kindness always finds its way back. And now, I want to pass it on. I don't want you to just be a worker here, Daniel. I want you to be my apprentice. Daniel's eyes widened. Your apprentice? Yes, Mr. Thompson nodded. I've been watching you, and I see something in you that reminds me of myself. You work hard, you don't give up, and most importantly, you have a good heart. I want you to learn everything, every recipe, every skill, so that one day, this bakery will be yours. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. No one had ever believed in him like this before. No one had ever offered him a future, a real chance at something more. He had come into this bakery expecting nothing, and now he was being given the greatest gift of all, hope. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "I won't let you down." Mr. Thompson reached across the table and patted Daniel's shoulder. "I know you won't." And with those words, Daniel's life changed forever. Years passed, and Daniel grew into a skilled baker and businessman. Under Mr. Thompson's guidance, he transformed the bakery into a thriving establishment, known not just for its delicious bread but for its generosity to the needy. The bakery became more than just a place for customers, it was a haven, a place where kindness was served as generously as the warm loaves that came out of the ovens. Daniel never forgot his own journey. He hired workers who had struggled like he once had, giving them not just jobs but dignity and a second chance. He made sure no one who came to his bakery left hungry, regardless of whether they could pay. The bakery stood as a reminder that kindness had shaped its very foundation. One winter evening, as Daniel was closing the shop, he noticed a young boy shivering on the sidewalk, his clothes threadbare, his arms wrapped tightly around his empty stomach. The sight stirred something deep within Daniel, a memory of a cold night long ago, when he had been that boy. Without a second thought, he approached the child with a warm loaf of bread and a gentle smile. He knelt down and handed it to him, the warmth seeping through the boy's cold fingers. "Here, take this," he said softly, just as he had done years ago. The boy looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes, his lips quivering not just from the cold but from the unexpected kindness. Daniel saw something familiar in those eyes, the same hunger, the same silent plea for hope. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes as he realized what had just happened. The cycle of kindness had come full circle. A small act of generosity had once saved him, and now, he was passing it on, ensuring that the ripple never stopped. A message to everyone: kindness is never wasted. A small gesture, a moment of compassion, can change someone's life in ways you may never see. In a world where struggles are hidden behind quiet eyes and unspoken words, be the person who extends a hand. The bread you give today might be the foundation of someone's tomorrow. Never underestimate the power of a simple act of kindness, it may come back to you in ways you never imagined. The end.